Mr. President, I rise today in gratitude for this opportunity to speak on the Senate floor. I want to express a lot of gratitude towards the senator from Massachusetts. She has been an eloquent advocate for the truth of our country. She has spoken here on this hallowed floor, but I have now also watched her speak in the streets, speak at airports, speak at rallies. She's one of those people who, like so many Americans, literally millions of Americans over these last few weeks, is saying with a chorus of conviction that they will not be silenced when the cause of our country is at stake. And so I join with her tonight and some of my other colleagues in standing up to really speak from the heart. I think that this floor has seen many partisan speeches, but this is not to me about Republican or Democrat. In fact, this is not a speech I ever imagined I would be giving in the United States Senate. I never thought that I would be here today talking about something that, quite honestly, was unimaginable to me just months ago. This is a time that I could not have foreseen, and I fear that my generation of Americans maybe perhaps should have known that moments like this are possible. That we who believe in the values of our nation, we who believe in the ideals enshrined in our Constitution, such as religious liberty, we should know that every generation of Americans has to prove worthy of these ideals and stay forever vigilant in their protection. And never to get so complacent that you think that this could never happen. The ideals that we enjoy were fought for and struggled for and often bled for, and folk died for. That we in our generation, with the privileges that we enjoy, the blessings of liberty that we luxuriate in, we have an obligation to stay vigilant, to ensure that moments like this never come, and if they do, that we stand with conviction and speak out against them, work against them, to resist any retrenchment of American values. What Donald Trump did in his executive action issued this past Friday is in no uncertain terms a break with American policy. I believe it is a violation of our very Constitution, that it is illegal, unconstitutional, as well as immoral. More than this, it very specifically makes this nation less safe and not more so. I want to repeat that. It makes this nation less safe and not more so. The ban was said put forth in a climate of fear, intending to try to appeal to people's fears and trying to tell people that doing this executive order was going to make us safer, but that in its essence is illogical when you look at the facts. Not only should it be known that it blocks immigration from 7 majority Muslim countries, 7 countries where not a single perpetrator of terrorist attacks on American soil have come from these countries dating back to well before 9/11. In fact, well before the 2000s, well before the 90s, well before the 80s. In fact, not since the 70s, over 40 years, on American soil, nobody from these countries no American has been killed by anybody in these countries of terrorist attacks. In addition to that, what this ban is doing is it's shutting down the refugee resettlement program for about 4 months and suspends the Syrian refugee program indefinitely, despite the fact that individuals entering the United States as refugees undergo the most heavily vetted resettlement process of any population traveling to the United States. So understand this, if you are trying to come into this country, student visas, waiver programs, there are so many ways to come into this country without going through the refugee process, which takes between 1 year and 3 years. And you're not just going through the vetting of the Department of State, but the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the National Counterterrorism Center. Numerous agencies over up to 3 years are vetting you. And let me tell you right now, again, people who go through this program, history is showing, you have not seen in any recent years that folks who are going through these programs pose a terrorist threat taking American lives. And so the very argument being used to push this ban is illogical and has no basis for any of the experiences we've had in this country. A former chief counsel for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services remarked that no competent terrorist would choose the U.S. refugee process as a preferred strategy for gaining entry into this country. Subjecting yourself to the 1 to 3 years, the vetting from multiple agencies, more than any other way to entry, is not a way for terrorists to try to gain access to this country at all. And so what we see is that this terrorist ban is putting focus, this executive order is putting focus in areas that do not produce safety, but do have the collateral consequence of making us less safe. The order indefinitely suspends the resettlement of Syrian refugees in the U.S. The majority of these folks are women and children who are fleeing barrel bombs, chemical attacks, military attacks on homes and schools. They're fleeing famine, they're fleeing starvation, they're fleeing the same violent extremism that we ourselves are trying to fight against. While the Syrian people face violence, terror, and oppression, the President of the United States has chosen to equate helpless refugees with those who are actually perpetrating the terror. And despite the fact that we have this stringent, years-long vetting program for Iraqis and Afghans who risk their lives to help Americans by acting as interpreters, the ban ends, astonishingly, it ends the special immigrant visa program and substitutes it with nothing. What is this special immigrant visa program that many of my colleagues have spoken about? It's a program that is specifically there for Iraqis and Afghanis who helped America and their families in danger, who put their necks out for us. They put themselves out there to assist our servicemen and servicewomen. It actually is there to help people that, because of their service to us as a country, have now had their lives endangered where they are. Now, I want to read a series of tweets just yesterday from Kirk Johnson, a former USAID administrator in Iraq, who wrote about these folks who put themselves on the line for Americans, who are our allies and our friends. This is what Kirk Johnson wrote. He says, "I served in Iraq as USAID's man in Fallujah, lived alongside Marines and interpreters as they fought terrorists. Over 100,000 of these Iraqis risked their lives for us during the war. They bled for our country. You said before signing," he's talking about President Trump, that, quote, "we only want to admit those into our countries who will support our country and love deeply our people." And what Kirk Johnson writes is, "I'd like you to know, Donald Trump, about some of these people. Homeboy lost his leg dragging a wounded U.S. sergeant out of the field of fire. He spent 4 years being vetted before coming here. There was Hussam, who helped us build schools. When insurgents found out on October of 2006, they left a severed dog's head on his front step that said, "Run." There's Faisal, an interpreter for troops that you command, Donald Trump, that died of a suicide bomb on March 14th, 2008. Mohammed was assassinated when terrorists who wanted to kill the traitor, in quotes, booby-trapped his house in January of 2008. Ali had both of his legs amputated by an IED blast while working as an interpreter in November 2007. Hamid died of a gunshot wound to the head while helping our troops in July 2007. I could do this all day, he wrote in his remarks. He goes on to say, those that helped us were Christians and Muslims, Yazidis, atheists, you name it. These people in Fallujah and the surrounding areas were our allies. When they ran through gunfire to save our troops, they didn't think about such labels. These Iraqis believed in America. They loved our country. They lost their country as a result of the choice that they made to help us. Your signature, Donald Trump, he's writing, just banned them. He continued, I have heard from many soldiers and Marines, some of them of extremely high rank, who believe this is a huge mistake. Our senior military officers with extensive experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, one told me it was heinous and counterproductive. Now, why is it counterproductive? Well, for one, when we're conducting dangerous missions, when we're relying on people in country to assist us with our counterterrorism efforts, if they are going to take that risk, put their lives on the lines, be subject of terrorism themselves, there should be a process that allows them, after proper vetting, to get into this country. That has been American policy. Even people who have been threatened and victimized and persecuted, they can't just walk into our country because some of our high-ranking Marines say so. They still go through vetting that often takes years. That's the process. It's the process that Donald Trump has now stopped. Yesterday, a report noted that radical jihadists, the people we're fighting against, the terrorists intending to kill us, were already using this executive order as a victory. Proof that the United States is at war with Islam. Now, some people say that claim is hard to make. This is just banning people from 7 countries. Well, look a little closer at the executive order. There are exceptions made for non-Muslims in those countries. Imagine this. We are the United States of America. Enshrined in our Constitution is this idea of freedom of religion, that there's no religious tests to vote. There's no religious tests to have citizenship. There's no religious tests to enjoy the richness of a nation that believes in religious liberty. But in one action by the President of the United States, who claims to be concerned about terrorism for these countries, he says, I'm going to stop people from entering. Oh, wait a minute, only the Muslims. Christians, you're welcome. If that is not a violation of our core principles of freedom of religion, that there should be religious tests to enter from these countries, that's an assault on all that we proclaim in our country to be our core values. This is not missed by our enemies. They're now trying to say this isn't a war between America and ISIS. This is not a war between America and radical jihadists. They want, as their propaganda tool, for people to believe that this is a war between the U.S. and Islam, between America and a religion. That is a lie. But when Donald Trump takes actions like this that specifically target people because of their faith, he is playing into the hands of the propagandists that seek to hurt us. National security experts from across the political spectrum, from Republicans and Democrats, have spoken out against this order on this basis and of how it will affect our security as a country. The former director of the CIA, General Michael Hayden, said this order, and I quote, "inarguably has made us less safe." What do those people that want to help us, that want to serve with our Marines, that want to be interpreters, that want to stand up for America, what are they to think now when America has shut their doors, where they've watched others do this, and now they can't gain access to this country? What are those allies of ours that say the great United States of America is standing up against terrorists, Muslim leaders in other countries? It's not about Islam, it's about the people who are conducting vicious terrorism, which is a sin on a peaceful religion. What can they say now when we have specifically targeted an executive order from our president, not at a country, but at people that pray a certain way in that country? What are we to think in the United States? This great nation born from the ideas of liberty and freedom, freedom to pray as you want. What are we to think? Despite all of the evidence to the contrary, just 2 days after President Trump's instituted this ban, he remarked, "Hey, this ban is going nicely," quote unquote. Earlier today, President Trump's spokesman referred to those being unlawfully detained as just being, quote, temporarily inconvenienced. We know that the reality of this situation is much different for the families and individuals across the globe who are affected. Many of them are permanent residents and green card holders for whom this executive order has amounted to a door slammed in their face by the country that is supposed to represent the shining beacon on the planet Earth of liberty and hope. Hundreds of people of 7 different nationalities have been trapped at American airports. Many of them were detained for hours on end without access to lawyers, handcuffed and interrogated. Some immediately deported, while many more have been turned away at the doors to their flights bound for the United States. People who followed all of the rules, who went through extensive vetting, who upended their lives. Doors slammed in their faces. This is not an inconvenience. I'm sorry. This is a denial of process, a denial of procedure. It's a denial of basic liberty and a violation of our principles. It's no wonder, though, that judges across the country began issuing stays within hours of this order becoming effective. As we saw in New York, how people like Hamid Ya'al-Salah Yadin, the 65-year-old mother of a sergeant, 65-year-old mother of a sergeant in the 82nd Airborne Division of the United States Army, who traveled from Iraq to see her son for the first time in 5 years. A mother of a sergeant in the 82nd Airborne. Someone who should be honored, lawfully entering in the United States, and because of this order, she was detained for 30 hours. denied a wheelchair, and handcuffed before her release. On Saturday night and early into the mornings, I saw Customs and Border Patrol officials at Dulles. I left Washington, D.C., and drove to Virginia to go to Dulles Airport. I saw Customs and Border Patrol's officials seemingly to defy the orders coming from a federal judge to at least permit all legal, permanent residents in detention to access legal counsel. I held the judge's order in my hands. Because of the kindness of a local law enforcement officer that was stationed in Dulles, I was able to shuttle to Customs and Border Protection. I was able to submit handwritten notes and questions to the officials who refused to meet with me, but I did not get much of an explanation as to why they were defying a clear order from a federal judge. Whether or not this was a case of bureaucratic confusion or a message from the courts getting lost, federal law enforcement officers under the supervision of the Department of Homeland Security ignored and defied the orders of a federal judge. To me, this is more outrage. And in a nation with 3 branches of government, with the judiciary with a clear role giving an order to the executive branch, I believe the defiance of that order also was unconstitutional. Access to counsel is a principle in our democracy. It's about fairness and due process. Failing to allow counsel, to me, seems a clear violation of constitutional norms and the ideals. The judge obviously believed so, and that's why they ordered counsel to be provided. Still, right now, we don't know how many people are being detained across the country in the wake of this executive order, or how many were immediately and quietly deported once they came here, again, thoroughly vetted in accordance with the law, but they were yet then deported upon their arrival in this country. I think Congress deserves answers. I wrote to Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly earlier this evening to seek them. This mistreatment of any legal permanent resident or visitor to this country is wrong, it is un-American, it undermines the truth of who we are, and it's patently unacceptable. This executive order has treated green card holders and immigrants to this nation as if they were criminals. It's torn families apart across the world and pulled the rug out from families who are preparing to begin a new life in the United States of America. And this order has betrayed some of our closest allies, men and women who risked their lives to help American service members deployed often on hostile soil. By ending these special immigrant visa programs established to help Iraqis and Afghans who risked their lives to help American forces is unacceptable. The United States cannot turn its back on those who stepped up and stepped in when we needed them most. Just this morning, I read about an Iraqi man, Sameh, who had risked his life to work with the American government in Iraq after waiting 7 years to gain entry, going through a laborious process of vetting under the special immigrant visa program. He and his family finally got the okay, and they were ready to start their new lives in America. On Saturday, he and his wife and 2 daughters had flown from Iraq to Istanbul, and they were sitting in their seats, ready to take off when they were removed from the plane by security officials. Foreign Policy magazine reported that through tears, Sameh's 7-year-old daughter asked, and I quote, "Why don't they want us in America?" American service members and veterans are joining a growing chorus speaking out against this misguided decision which threatens the common sense program that helps our military do their jobs. Take Zachary Iskall, a former Marine infantry officer who wrote about some of the Iraqis he worked with, who had risked everything to help the United States. He told the story of one man, Frank, who had served as an interpreter for his Marine Corps unit, and in doing so, had taken a bullet in his leg. Frank had remained in Iraq since then. Zachary wrote, and I quote Zachary's words, "He was still living in Baghdad with daily fears for his and his family's safety. After 6 years of vetting, including what seemed like countless interviews and background checks by various government agencies, he had finally been cleared to come to the United States with his pregnant wife and 18-month-old son." Zachary went on to write, "My wife and I began to prepare our guest room for their arrival, but now, because of a new executive order by President Trump, Frank is no longer welcome." This is an American military man preparing to have these folks who put their lives on the lines for him stay in his home. This special visa program is why people like Mohammed and Saif al-Nasri, who I'm proud to call a New Jersey resident, one of my constituents, were able to come to this country. And I'd like to share a little bit about this family. Mohammed al-Nasri was finishing high school in Iraq in 2003 when the Americans arrived. As an English speaker, Mohammed began helping the Americans stationed near his neighborhood, working for free as a neighborhood translator. When the unit he had become friends with left, he decided to apply for work as an official interpreter with the United States Army. But by 2004, he had been sent to Fallujah to work with and help protect American military fighting there. Because of his work with the American military, he recounts receiving hundreds of death notes, threatening not just his life, but the life of his mother and his family. He returned to Baghdad, where he worked, despite these threats, as a contractor with an American company until one day he was targeted and almost assassinated in his car. He knew at that point, with the death threats and the assassination attempt, that he had to get out of the country. After moving to Australia, his sister informed him about America's special visa program. So he applied. And 2.5 years later, he was able to join his family in the United States. In a call with my office just earlier today, he wanted to make it clear that he had arrived on the United States on July 3rd and that by August 10th, he had started his job. He remarked to my team that he couldn't understand why anyone would think he was coming to America because it was easy or because he wanted something. He spent most of his savings trying to get to America, and he had never taken any benefits since arriving here. Mohammed met his wife in New Jersey and now lives in our state, works at Costco, and is working to obtain his citizenship. He shared that this executive order made him more sad than scared, and that it simply didn't make sense to ban regular, hardworking people who were also afraid of terrorists, persecuted by terrorists, almost killed by terrorists, who had done so much to help our country, it made no sense to ban them. This is what he said in quotes. "We ran away from these people," he said. "I paid all the money I had to leave for the safety of his family." Mohammed's brother is now a proud American citizen, father of 2 and resident of Scotch Plains, New Jersey. Saif and his wife had worked as pharmacists in Iraq, but when the war began, he knew he needed to get involved. So Saif worked as a translator and reporter for the Los Angeles Times during the war in Iraq, providing support and key insights to American media and the American public. Saif and his wife were able to come to the United States in 2008 through that special visa program, the SIV program, and slowly worked their way through school. And now, as pharmacy technicians, they have their license, pharmacy license. Saif is a pharmacy manager in Cranford, New Jersey, a homeowner in Scotch Plains, and a proud father of 2 girls. He savors this country, this precious nation. He celebrates our values. He is a glowing testimony to the truth of who we are. His success is our success. His family's security and safety and thriving life in New Jersey give luster to the greatness of America. In a phone call yesterday, Saif remarked that this executive order was embarrassing and hurtful, that it was clear Muslims were being targeted, and that he couldn't understand why those who were so heavily vetted, like his family, posed such a threat. Saif and his family are heavily involved in their community in Scotch Plains, and they make sure to offer support to those families similar to theirs who come from Iraq seeking refugees. You see, they're not just basking and luxuriating in their good fortune to become American citizens. They're honoring one of the great hollow traditions of our country, which is service. At the end of the call, Saif remarked that he didn't think this would happen in any other country. It seemed like he was about to say this kind of religiously targeted ban wouldn't happen anywhere else, and he might have been right. But instead, he said that if this kind of executive order from a leader in any other country happened against any group of people, you would never see the kind of resistance and action of so many standing up for them. Even in one of the darkest moments in recent history, this man, this patriot, this person who served our nation's interests and continues to volunteer in service to this day, he could have been given reason to be angry, upset, and cynical. But what is beautiful about our conversations with this man is that he hasn't given up faith. He still believes in the American people. The beautiful thing about the conversations my staff has had with those New Jersey residents who once were serving our nation in theaters of violence and terrorism, standing up for our military, for our press, victimized by terroristic threats, shot at, assassination attempts. These families now here in America, witnessing this executive order, are saddened and embarrassed by it, but they're not giving up on their faith in America. That's our story. I stand here today, dare I say, all of the members of the Senate stand here today because of this tradition of our country, that even when the past, when we had dark chapters from our past, where others in positions of power violated our values, the faith and activism and engagement of American people remained. I dare say this. We are the oldest constitutional democracy on the planet Earth. God, the genius of our founders who put on paper ideals that have been heralded for centuries on the planet Earth. Newer constitutional democracies literally would study our Constitution and model their nations after elements of our Constitution. But I'm sad to tell you that some of those countries, democracies, have failed. They had the vaunted words, they put forth the same principles and ideals, but yet their countries, democracies have been overthrown, have seen despots who destroyed the very spirit of those ideals. Why has America persisted? It's not just because of the documents that are sacred and so special in the course of human events, but what makes those documents true and real, because those sentiments are not just written on parchment. Every generation has had them written on their hearts and have said that no matter what I may be experiencing in this country, I am going to dedicate myself to the principles and ideals, because as great as our founders were when they founded this country, in liberty and in justice and equality under the law, it didn't apply to everyone. Didn't apply to women. Native Americans were referred to as savages. African Americans were fractions of human beings, but yet the faith of a people in every generation worked to expand the concepts of liberty and freedom. They made the Constitution more real. They made our union more perfect. They made our country's truth more true for more people. It's why great poets like Langston Hughes wrote, "America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be." That is the call to the citizenry of this country. There have been dark days in our past, but every generation of Americans, despite the dark actions of people in power, understand this truth, that the power of the people is greater than the people in power. And if we never lose faith in the ideals of this nation, if we keep standing and working and sacrificing and struggling, every generation can advance the ideals of our country and make us more free and more true and more real for more people. And so last week, we saw yet another American leader shrink the ideals of this country, try to pull us backwards to times past when we turned our back on people fleeing persecution. What Donald Trump did is try to pull back on the ideals inscribed on that great statue that sits right next to New Jersey, the mother of exiles, who says in poetry, among other things, give us. Not, hey, you can come in. No, a demand. Give us. You're tired. You're hungry. You're poor. You're huddled masses. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Give us those. It is a demand to the world that we will take those that are oppressed. We will take those that are being violated. We will take those that are being victimized. And a president turns his back on those ideals. We've seen it before. Dr. Lauren Feldman writes to me about chapters of dark pasts. She writes, "Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. I am a Jew. My relatives were unable to find refuge in our country and were murdered by the Nazis. My grandmother lost her beloved aunt, Rokel Rosnick Gertman, an uncle, and 4 young cousins that she had never met. Had we as a country done the right thing and welcomed these refugees fleeing the Nazis, Tante Rokel and millions of others could have joined their family members in safety, and we could have been proud of our country instead of ashamed of the racist paper walls built by the FDR administration to keep my family and others out. Please tell Mr. Trump that we cannot go back. We must remain a beacon of safety and refuge for the persecuted. Please do all that you can to prevent this ban from being enacted. Please think of my relatives and the relatives of your other constituents and fellow citizens who needlessly and shamefully were murdered because of our fear and racism. We are better than that. You are better than that. She concludes, thank you for your time and service. Dr. Lauren Feldman, Princeton. We are the United States of America. We haven't been perfect, but there has been a striving and a yearning in every generation to be more so. I am a product of people, black and white, Christian and Jewish and Muslim, who even though issues didn't affect them directly, they knew that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and they marched, and they fought, they sat in, they got on buses for freedom rides, knowing they would be bombed. They tried to cross bridges, standing up against law enforcement, state troopers, governors who dared them to try to pass them. They were implacable walls of racism and hatred, but they stood anyway, and they bled the southern soil red for my freedom, for our freedom, for this nation's freedom. I worked all my career for the safety of communities. Yes, we must make sure our nation is safe. But don't let fear and concerns for safety make us ever turn our back on our values as a nation. When we are threatened by our enemies, it is not a time to surrender our values. It is time to double down on them. The terrorists win if they change our free hearts and our souls set on liberty. We as a nation are called to be great, to be a beacon of liberty and justice. There are people now pulled off of airplanes, forced to return to communities where their lives are being threatened. We made a bargain with them. Stand for America. Stand with our military. Stand against terrorism. There are people that went through years and years of vetting by agency after agency, and when they were on the brink of freedom, like people of old who were on ships that came into our harbor, they were turned away, back to face persecution and injustice. That's not the America that I believe in. It is not who we are. And so I say to our president in prayer, in deep, abiding faith, repeal your executive order. Stand up for our principles, defend them, be the champion that millions of Americans want you to be. And I say to Americans, to all of us as a country, this is not a time to despair. It's not a time to give up. It's not a time to grow cynical or lose faith in our country or our values. No, remember our history. When dark times come, when it seems that people in the highest points of power are turning their back on their ideals, it is not a time to retreat or equivocate. It's a time to fight, to stand up, to resist. We are a great nation, not just because of the words printed on a constitution. We are a great nation because people with great sacrifice and struggle fought to live those words and to make them real in the lives of every single person. America, we must now stand up. The opposite of justice is not just injustice, it is also silence and indifference. This may not affect you or your family directly, but it is a threat to all of our collective values. You go to the Jefferson Memorial and read those final words. Thomas Jefferson knew that for this nation to be great, we had to pledge to each other an unusual level of commitment. He said we must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. There is no honor in this executive order. But we as Americans now must pledge our sacred honor to do all we can to tear this order down so that the truth of America can rise again. Mr. President, I yield the floor.